So we're back and we have Dr. Phillip Ninela on the line with us. He is the Deputy Director for Green Industries at the National Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And he's going to be sharing with us South Africa's policy responses to eco-mobility. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of questions for Dr. Ninela, so let me not eat any more into his presentation time and let him take the floor. Dr. Ninela, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone out there. This is my presentation. Just a brief outline. I'm just going to take you through the introduction, the rationale for choosing the topic that I chose, a brief outline, some philosophical debates around eco-mobility and e-mobility, current levers and gaps in promoting eco-mobility in the country. So I'm going to be touching on a few things there. The legislative framework and the fiscal measures, monetary measures, and so on and so on. So I'm going to go and touch on the roadmaps, parts to e-mobility, and which one. I know this has been discussed in the past day and today. And then I'm going to provide some conclusion and some recommendations from my point of view. I'm Phillip. I'm a public servant, by the way. I'm placed at the National Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. I'm a player in the greening game, while small in terms of organizational ranks, but I believe I have a big heart to make a difference. I'm of the view that in the public service, there are different types of decision makers. Again, that's my point of view. There's a decision initiator or a decision inventor, and there's a supporter of such decisions, and then there's a decision approver. I think it all depends. Whether the approach that is adopted is a bottom-up approach or is a top-down approach. But the process is very hierarchical, it's very bureaucratic at the same time. So, and the role at my level is generally to gather information, analyze it, present it, and make recommendations to the seniors or the principals who in turn have to use such to make very, very difficult decisions. And indeed, there are very difficult decisions that decision makers have to make. And I'm glad that the previous speaker did allude to the point that government is actually doing something contrary to popular belief sometimes. There's can be a bad picture painted, but government is actually trying its best under the circumstances. And I believe I fall in the first category as a decision inventor or initiator in most cases. But again, as I indicated, it depends on the process or on the that has been adopted, whether it's a bottom up or a top down. But the whole idea is to support informed decision making. So the information that we gather from time to time is trying to assist to arrive at win-win situations, minimizing trade-offs or arriving at zero trade-offs. But it's highly unlikely to avoid the negatives. There can be winners and losers in the transition. But the whole idea is to try and achieve that in a just manner. But at some stage, there is a senior official who reminded me that my role is very, very important. I should not actually undermine it. It's very, very important because as a decision initiator, if that is who I am, the decisions that get made, ultimately, my input can have a bearing on those. So I have served in the pulp and paper industry. It was a long time ago. And then ever since I've joined the public sector, I think I've been in the public sector for more than 17 years, working in the waste management space, in the energy space, largely wind, solar, PV, and bioenergy in particular. Now I'm in the transport sector and specifically focusing on trying to provide policy advocacy on the just transition, sustainable transportation in particular. Eco-mobility, I'm going to use those terms interchangeable, though they differ. Eco-mobility and e-mobility, the later, which I believe forms part of the first, There's a lot of interest in the country that has been made very, very clearly in the past 2 days. There's different interest groups and there's different players in the space. But what I've noted is that everybody agrees that South Africa needs to do something in this space. We are already lagging behind from the rest of the world, from the international community. So we have to move at a higher speed. But there are circumstances that often make a government not move at that speed that is often expected from government. So if I were to justify why I chose this topic, I believe I'm going to contribute in just giving some insight or providing some insight that government is actually one of the key players and partners in the rollout of both e-mobility and electromobility in the country. This definitely calls for some kind of intervention on the part of government. And or what kind of intervention that is required, I think I'm going to touch on some of those. And that has been discussed in the previous 2 days as well. And internationally, there's a lot of discussions around that, a lot of real life experiences on how government has intervened. So there's a number of levers that government can utilize to promote that demand and supply. But there are still gaps in the case of South Africa, and those need to be addressed. So I believe in terms of my value add in this conference, I'm just going to share with you a presentation which is very much packed with a lot of philosophical questions, debates, and some responses. So there's not a lot of numbers and there's not a lot of illustrations. So my sincere apology for that. I know this can be boring, especially at this time of the day when we've been listening to wonderful presentations of the past day and today. But there are some empirical research findings done by some researchers in the country and some done by myself, evaluating existing legislative and policy frameworks. And that also includes engaging with a number of people in government, the industry, and other sectors. In-depth interviews with such. So there's also some real policy positions on sustainable transportation, including e-mobility that I'll be touching on. I may not provide answers on all areas, but I hope to provide some insight. The approach is also, please note that it's not very much limited to the current role of my department, but the department and some presenters in the past have actually touched on that in the past. I believe we are pretty much familiar with some of the work that is happening between government and the industry. So, but my view is that any decision taken to support the rollout of e-mobility programs in the country, they should take into account these philosophical issues because they are a reality in South Africa. We cannot run away from it. It's a matter of trying to find a balance and to say how do we get these often competing priorities, matching at some point. So my view is that the diversity of views, I think that's the main view that I have, the diversity of views and interests and priorities that we have in the country, to a certain extent, they do play a role to the current rate. That is the slow rate of uptake of new technologies, including e-mobility in the country. I serve in this institution whose mandate is clearly defined. I'm not going to go in details. That is found on the website of the department that I work for. The vision is there, the mission is there, the values are there. I think, again, that's my view to say that I fully believe that this is purely focusing on the economic leg of sustainability, of the sustainability models that I will be touching on in the next slide or two. But there's still a role within the department to play some policy advocacy work, influencing just transition discussions, supporting measures to green the South African economy, cleaner production, and so on, while promoting the manufacturing of greener environmental goods and services in the country. There's talk of the new energy vehicles. I'm going to touch on that again. Inputs in that space again. So let me just proceed to the policy-related greening philosophical debates in South Africa. It's true that South Africa is a very diverse country. We've got many, but yet independent goals of national importance. So a country that has got one of the highest rates of unemployment. I think that's more than 34%. I think it depends on it goes up to 60% if it depends on the categories that you look at. The issue of access to efficient but yet affordable services, transportation is also very critical. We are a country that has got some special legacy planning issues, which led to residential areas being located far away from work areas. That is a reality in the country. Economic development, balance of trade issues, energy security. We import a lot in this country when it comes to liquid fuels in this case, including gas as well. Access to energy resources is also another issue that we often discuss. Mineral resources and renewable energy. We have a well-established conventional automotive industry, the transportation and energy industries. All these industries have actually proven themselves in the country's economy. So whenever we make decisions about the transition, we have to take into consideration all these factors. So the policy goals cut across the three pillars of sustainable development. On one hand, it's important for the country to uplift the socioeconomic status of the citizens, but at the same time, we have to protect the biophysical environment for the benefit of human beings here in this country. So there's three sustainability models that have been developed globally. One of them is the three-legged chair that you can see there under what I call it plate one. The overlapping cycle, the nested dependencies models. All these models exist to try and justify what is the most important. So I'm of the view that these models exist in South Africa, so they are being applied. The of people that exist. The economy is important, so social development is important, environmental development, protection, and so on is also important. I can go on and on. You know, this is just another model. It just depends which one you believe it tells a story on what you are trying to convey, moving forward. But the big question is where do these meet? There are extreme green extremists. They are extreme brown. Okay, the brown extremists. Okay, those are words. I'm not sure if those words exist in real life, but those are words which they just came into my mind to say that is the reality that we are faced with. I think there's a meeting point somewhere, or there should be a meeting point somewhere. In most cases, I always see myself as sitting somewhere in the middle, not as a green extremist, not as a brown extremist. Yeah, I think it's a matter of saying where exactly do we meet? How do we achieve that balancing act that I'm talking about? If I were to take you back, sorry to bore you with this. If I were to go back to the start of the greening legislative framework in South Africa post 1994, well, I can even go back prior to 1994 when it started with the Environment Conservation Act, Atmospheric Pollution Prevention Act, and those legislative frameworks were there to protect the environment. Those are greening legislative frameworks. And then post 1994, and then we got the Constitution, the country's supreme law. I think specifically there is Section 24 of the Bill of Rights, which says clearly that everyone has a right to an environment that is not detrimental to health, to have it protected for the benefit of present and future generations. It is, again, my view that this is purely anthropocentric because the environment, it says, it should be protected for the benefit of people. I think that is a very, very important statement in that piece of legislation. It's referring to the environment. In which one? The ecological one, the social one, the biological, or the physical environment? And I believe it is referring to all of them. Yeah. So we also have this couple of international protocols on climate change. The Kyoto Protocol is an example, and a whole lot of others, including our own local net frameworks such as NEMA and others, that is National Environment Management Act, and so on and so on. South Africa is actually a party to all of these, so they are equally important when you speak about eco-mobility, when you speak about electromobility as well. You cannot ignore all this. There's an obligation in terms of this constitution to protect. There's also an obligation from the. It's important to note that South Africa is lagging behind with regards to specific, what I call it, what one of the people I interviewed when I did my research call it a killer part of killer punches when it comes to encouraging the massive rollout and uptake of in alternatives. In South Africa, and there are gaps in promoting eco-friendly mobility as well. That is widely written about in South Africa and in the context of South Africa and international relations. South Africa, it does have many tools to promote the demand and supply of transport and automotive goods and services. I think the question is always around the extent to which this are applicable in the transition. I think that is where a lot of work needs to be done. Looking at what is there and what needs to be done. That is very much written about, and that has been discussed in the previous 2 days as well. If I can take you back in 2016, where we did a research, I think this was done on behalf of our department by a service provider. He came up with this kind of a model, if I can put it, or some kind of a map, which was describing the status quo when it comes to green transportation in South Africa. It was not limited to electromobility. As you can see, the slide from I think the first one, it just tells you that there's a lot of focus on the conventional system in South Africa. There's a number of subsidies. There's a number of regulations, there's a number of taxation systems that apply to the conventional systems of doing things. But if you move further down to the electromobility, EVs and so on, there's not much. If you go to the alternative fuels like biodiesel, bioethanol, again, there's not much. There's still a lot that needs to be done in these areas within the context of eco-mobility. In the country. I think one can still share that study. It was done on behalf of the DTIC. You can actually see what is meant by that R11, that R10, and so on and so on. So it's not very much detailed in this presentation of mine. And on top of that, I think in 2019, as part of my research, when I finished my PhD in 2019, I think it's just an extract from some of the indirect interviews that I conducted. Just a small sample of officials from government, the industry, and organizations who provided some examples on how government is actually performing in this space. But kindly note that the responses are not generalizable. They're not representing the views of the entire South African society. It was just a small sample. They were only obtained to solicit some insight on the topic. There were around 67 items that were raised as weaknesses of the current transport system in South Africa, and they're spread across the 9 categories. You can see what what came out of that. Lack of coordination or cohesion. Please bear in mind, it's not me who's saying this or who said this. It emanates from the research that was conducted in 2019. Too much subsidization of the status quo, it came out as high. Okay, rent seeking and lobbying as well. It appeared as one of the things. Competing priorities, no ring fencing, choice of unsuitable mode of technology, policy implementation and enforcement, lack of strategic direction, political instability, you name them. So those are things which that small sample of people that were approached for their views contributed in this research. You can find it in this URL. This was done as part of the PhD research at the University of South Africa. You can have access to this, and then you can actually read in details, because this is very brief what I'm presenting here. Again, this is the content of that which was extracted from that thesis. This also built from a number of information sources, including the work that we did for the DTI, that was done for the DTI in 2016, and other sources. There are 6 categories that you can see that one examined. Cleaner fuels, you can see the story there, the status quo in terms of cleaner fuels. We had cleaner fuels 2, sorry, my apology, cleaner fuels 1 program and cleaner fuels 2 program, and the status quo is there. That cleaner, CF1 is equivalent to Euro 2. That is what we have. I mean, that's what we have in South Africa currently. I think we have been trying, and they're still trying to move towards cleaner fuels 2. There's been a call for that. Under fuel economy, we've got that as well. We only have the CO2 emission tax on your passenger vehicles. We also have that mandatory eco-labeling for new vehicles, but it's not a fuel economy. There are no fuel economy targets, if I can put it that way. It's unlike the fuel economy standards that you see developed by countries at international level. On the technology switch, which I think is what is also of interest, given the context of today's discussion. It came out that South Africa, it's the high duties on EVs. One has been hearing that story, and it's there, it's existing. Yeah, it is indeed there, it's true. The ad valorem on green cars, specifically, new energy vehicles, sometimes. Also see rigid application of procurement rules. Again, there's a lot of details in that to explain that what actually is meant by that. There is no dedicated incentive mechanism, not at the present moment, but there's work you can see in the next slide to moving towards that, including the work on the new energy vehicles, which has been discussed already. Under the positives, you can see that trade on auto components is a good thing. Zero duties under the TDCA agreement, custom duty rebates, CO2 or fuel efficiency levy on fuel guzzlers. The silence on vehicle conversion to green. There is direct funding. There's funding available, but it's just that it's not maybe targeted to the greener alternatives, if I can put it that way. I'm not going to go details in fuel, but again, no biofuel incentive mechanism. Fuel levy on biofuels, VAT on biofuels, import duty on fuels from McUSO and general member states. Gas and electricity is not declared as vehicle fuel and no dedicated incentive. So it is what emanated from that research. I'm not going to go in details to modal shift. I'm not going to go in details on non-motorized transportation in South Africa, but you can all get detailed explanation of what all those things mean in that research that I'm alluding to below. Again, this is almost still the same thing that is contained there. It's just extracted from a table of contents from the thesis. I'm not going to dwell there. Then the same there applies. Just explains in terms of the table of contents what exactly is said there. Again, that one, that's almost the same thing. But what has happened since then? From the year that research was conducted, was completed in 2019. Just again to go back to what the previous speaker alluded to, that government is actually not sitting down and folding hands. There's actually work in the background that is going on. It's a matter of deciding how fast that work is in terms of meeting the targets, in terms of achieving what the stakeholders out there are expecting to see government doing. But there are guidelines to promote the procurement of electric vehicles in the public sector. The Department of Transport has done that. The extent of those guidelines in terms of covering the e-mobility. I think if you want more details on that one, colleagues from the Department of Transport can be approached, and they can actually share those guidelines to see what exactly is there. There's the auto green paper on new energy vehicles. It's been spoken about, and a lot of discussion, from my understanding, is taking place between government and industry to try and come up with that. There's also a biofuel regulatory framework, which makes provisions for an incentive mechanism. I think there are discussions underway. I think the Department of Minerals and Resources and Energy can actually provide more feedback with regards to the progress in that space. So, sorry, sorry, guys. Okay. So my apology for that. There's a process to review and develop a framework for EV regulations. I think that work is underway. It's still early days. I think there's discussions at the present moment, and the Department of Transport is actually facilitating that work. What has happened since then? Okay, it's exactly what I've just alluded to. Procurement guidelines for EVs, the auto green paper on NEVs, process underway. Biofuel. My apology for the typo there. Biofuel regulatory framework and others. I'm sure there might be other developments in other areas which are not included or highlighted in the slide. Some believe that government can actually do a lot to make adjustments on the fiscus. There's so many diverse needs, as I indicated, in South Africa, but which one to prioritize? So some kind of balancing act is actually a definite must here in the case of South Africa. These are some of the tools that have been indicated in the literature: price subsidies, tax reductions, fuel taxation, and all those that you can see that are listed in there. I think there's a question around this. In terms of the roadmap, obviously there are different pathways which are being explored by different OEMs in the country and by different players in the country. The question is whether we move from the internal combustion engine era and we move in a transitional manner, going to the hybrid electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and then eventually maybe we adopt BEVs and hydrogen fuel cells at a later stage. Also, whether we should shoot straight from ICE to BEVs directly. What does this mean? Does it mean we have to ignore all other technologies, all the transitional technologies that are capable? Continuation or termination of initiatives already implemented at municipal level, e.g. CNG buses, biofuel regulatory framework, and all those. So the current approach adopted in government, as implied in the Green Transport Strategy, takes a neutral approach, allowing all technologies. If I were to provide some kind of recommendations, the transition to e-mobility is taking place under these circumstances. I think it's very important that we, including the investor community, takes note of that. It is actually a reality in South Africa. It's a matter of managing the priorities, managing the interests, and so on and so on. So the biggest challenge from my point of view that I'm seeing is balancing these aspirations. How do we transition without causing too much disruptions? In other words, a stepwise or programmatic approach is actually required. And also from a supply point of view, very serious commitments from the investor community, including OEM, that the country can produce, including beneficiation of minerals the country is well endowed with. And also government is actually required, government should actually, and as well as the industry, work together to bring about this transition. I wouldn't lie, again, I want to emphasize that the industry and government are actually doing a lot of work here in the background, and they need to continue working like that to come up with an amicable solution for the country. I think let me end there and really thank to be given this opportunity, and my apology bore you with detail in terms of words and so on, not a lot of numbers and so on. But this is where I can be found. Thank you so much.
Dr. Ninela, thank you very much. So we've got a little bit more time with you before we jump into our next speaker, and I've got two kind of big questions that I need to ask. They kind of sum up all the other questions that I have. The first question is, putting aside the tax matter, so let's disregard tax for the time being. Do you believe that government has the ability and or the appetite to determine the rate of EV adoption? As opposed to simply just managing the changes that will inevitably come. And how do you think government should react to this?
It's actually it's a call that actually requires intervention not only from government, the industry as well, and not only the industry and the consumer community as well. One thing that I've noted, I stand to be corrected though, I'm not seeing a lot of advertisement on the new energy vehicles on national television, as an example, and different media platforms. So people need to see these things being advertised. People need to see these things being driven. So there's a role that government can play to a certain extent. But in addition to what government can do, there is a role that the industry community as well, throughout the value chain, from manufacturing right through to the retail sector, need to do to enhance awareness on these existing machines. But at the same time, government needs to play a particular role. But we have been told, and we know, okay, whether we know, we have been told that the fiscus is actually not enough. So there must be investments from the private investors to support the fiscus, because there's so many priorities that government is focusing on. So everybody needs to come together and support the transition.
Fantastic. And in light of that, Dr. Ninela, another question that I have for you is around that investments by the private sector. Is there appetite at the moment for government to develop policy to try and incentivize these local and international businesses to invest in both e-mobility products and the actual vehicles themselves? Things like providing tax breaks or long-term land leases. Are these type of things that we can expect to see on the horizon soon to try and incentivize those conversations? I know we were speaking to an earlier speaker who said that there are OEMs looking at South Africa at the moment, and it's basically a poker game of who blinks first. Is government looking to incentivize this manufacture?
If you look at the work that is currently happening in government, I'm not very much involved in it. But it's actually it will try to assist to stimulate the demand and supply of new energy vehicles. What I'm referring to is actually the new energy, the NEV program that has been introduced by speakers, that has been alluded to by speakers. So I'm of the view that what's going to come out of that program should actually provide a direction on what government's contribution can be in incentivizing manufacturing of the automotives in the country, green automotives in the country. But again, it's government and the private sector that have to work together to.
Fantastic. My apologies. We seem to have lost Dr. Ninela there for a moment, but I think what he was trying to allude to was that government is looking to incentivize investments into the private sector through that new energy vehicle program, as alluded to by Gaylor, and looking to incentivize that manufacture so that we can ensure we protect our automotive sector. Unfortunately, we seem to have lost him before I could ask him any of the other questions that we had lined up. But massive thank you to Dr. Phillip Ninela for sharing some of the insights with us. I'm sure it gives people a lot of peace of mind to know that government is proactively looking and managing the sector across all the various departments, from the DTIC to the Department of Transport and everyone in between. So thank you very much, Dr. Ninela.